I'm wondering, as you guys talk about these various innovations and are trying to differentiate the quality of products that you're trying to bring to market versus whatever else people just see on a shelf or hear about, you know, there is value in the science and there's value in the process, but conveying that value to an end patient or consumer can be challenging. And I think as people try to innovate these products, just finding others willing to invest in them because they believe that the incremental value is there is difficult. So if we're talking to somebody looking at going down this path and doing it the right way, how do we help them understand how to innovate in a way that is distinguishable from those products that were just thrown on a shelf?
That's an outstanding question. And especially when you consider that we're kind of still sort of in the gold rush aspect of the cannabis Wild West. I think to some degree, some of that is a little bit behind us. And going forward, we're going to have a more educated consumer who is going to have higher expectations of the products that are on the market. And
that's certainly my hope. I agree with you. I think looking at, as an industry, how we work together to educate the populace in general, whether it's by country, in the US by state, Canada by province, whatever that is that we're putting forth to really make sure we highlight that. It's incumbent upon all of us in all aspects to be able to convey that, that distinguishing value. And sometimes that's through certifications, sometimes that's through licenses and permits, and frequently it's just about having those one-to-one conversations, I think. Educating doctors, for example.
Well, I feel like Europe is going to have a big impact on the rest of the world because European standards are higher than they are in other parts of the world, and the benefit for consumers and patients is that to some degree that's going to have a trickle-down effect across the globe. And so some of the companies that will be international in nature, potentially having grow ops and manufacturing facilities in multiple countries, I believe they're going to be operating at EU GMP standards, and that's going to result in having superior products available on the market. And so where people are manufacturing products that you know, let's just say, for example, someone's saying, oh, well, this is a great CBD product. And then you read the label and CBD is the absolute last ingredient, ingredient profile. And maybe, you know, there's so little regulation in this space, so there doesn't have to always be truth in labeling. And so there are some not so good business practices taking place in the market. And I feel like there is a group of companies that are doing it the right way, and they are trying to achieve higher standards so that they can get their products into markets like the EU and still will operate here in the US. And that's good for all companies, regardless of what country they're operating in.
Well, so if I can just jump in here real quick. So just to piggyback off of what you were saying, Nisha, I agree 100%. And I would add, you know, the industry is evolving. We came from a place where, and I came from a place like not long ago. I feel like the whole industry has been in existence for a total of like about an hour, but we talk about it, it's been around for 200 years. But we're coming from a place where not so long ago, you know, coffee shops all over Brooklyn would put some CBD in their coffee and it would sell like hotcakes. I mean, it just flew off the shelves. They couldn't make that coffee fast enough to meet the demand of the consumers. And you see that across the board in cannabis and across the globe in terms of, you know, you have, like, to your point, you have CBD on the label, even if it's the last ingredient. The consumer just wasn't there yet, and they just bought it because they just didn't know any better. And I think that
It has CBD in it.
It has CBD. This must cure everything. Like, this will literally just make my life 1,000 times better. And what we know is that that's not true, right? Like, that's not true at all. And so I think that, you know, in defense of, I guess, those in sort of like the legacy mindset, the founders of this industry who have been somewhat resistant to the innovation that Nishi and I are talking about and looking at. In their defense, they were there for the green rush, for the gold rush, where all they had to do was put a THC product or a CBD product on the shelf, and it sold itself. And I think that we're getting to a point where we're evolving not only as an industry, but the consumer's evolving as well. And the consumer is going into the store, looking at a shelf full of tinctures, and all of them range between, you know, $50 and $100. And they start asking themselves, what's the difference, and what is this actually doing for me?
And I think, hey, you guys, I think it's important to keep in mind that the discussion we're having right now actually feels very US centric, because we're talking about the shelf space and the consumers and the CBD off the shelf. While as if I go to Europe or Latin America and we really shift into that medicinal landscape, right? And we're talking about innovation and how we communicate medicinal benefits. The discussion is very different, and the legacy aspects that exist within the U.S. Are very different, for example, than the legacy aspects, which is really herbal medicine in a region like Asia. And so, Josh, I wanted to ask, like, what is the Israeli perspective on this? Because a lot of the work you're doing with Rafi and your team is based there. And so how is that sort of different in changing? Because I agree, Europe is a huge market, but when we talk about research, frequently people toss out Israel as, you know, a leading innovator in that space worldwide. Why is that? What are they doing that's different? What's the perspective?
So first of all, just to touch on what you were saying in terms of, you know, global versus US, and I couldn't agree more. I think the point there is, it speaks more to reasons why the industry is stagnant or has been stagnant in terms of progress on the innovation side, and the resistance towards, you know, people like Nishi and myself looking at the science side. And I think when we're looking at Israel, their focus is pretty much the inverse of everything that we've just mentioned. So their approach has been, you know, going back to 50 plus years ago, it started with a question. People claim that this plant creates this psychoactive effect. Why? Like, what is happening, like, with this plant? What is this all about? People claim, and then it evolved. People claim anecdotally that it helps with severe nausea during chemotherapy. But why? Like, what components of this plant actually do that? And if you could answer that question, then you're unleashing endless potential. And so I think what's exciting about what's happening in Israel is that they've been approaching it. There's no stigma. The regulatory environment is very conducive to scientific research. Every major research institution, university, hospital has some cannabis department, cannabis-related research. And so our operations at the Israel Labs are based in Israel, and we have a team of scientists on the ground in Israel. And when we're looking at the global landscape, we're seeing there is a trend globally towards natural remedies, towards wellness, and so it's almost like the perfect storm, or the perfect timing rather, to start tapping into our scientific knowledge from what's been done in Israel and translating that to the wellness markets across the globe.